All right, scene three. So scene three is pretty long and important. So this might take a little bit. But the first part of scene three is can be a little confusing. But basically, we start out scene three, we switch settings again, and we are now where the senators are meeting and the Duke. And I always picture this as them kind of standing around a map, like if you've ever seen a TV show where they're planning war strategies, and they have this map and they have all these like little toy ships and toy soldiers and they're like pushing them around like, oh, the troops are here, oh no, let's move the troops here or whatever. So that's what they're doing basically. And basically all of this first part is all to say, hey, the Turks are attacking Cyprus. So apparently the Venetians have some interests in Cyprus. Let me pull up a map and kind of tell you a little bit about Cyprus. Okay, so looking at this map, I hope it's still recording. We will see, I guess, in a second. So if we look at this map, we see again, I talked about before, Shakespeare's writing in England and he sets this and some other plays in Italy because it's this warmer climate. And they thought that that meant that the people there were more passionate. And so that's what's happening. So Venice, like I said before, is kind of right here in Italy. Let's zoom in a little bit and get some closer here. So Venice is about right here, and we have Mediterranean Sea. And remember, I said that Moors are people who are from like northern Africa right here, but also all the way through here. And I said in this play, we kind of can see the terms Moors, Ottomites, Turks as all the same kind of thing, same kind of people. Those terms are slightly different, but in this case, we're kind of looking at them as the same. So Cyprus is this big island right here, kind of in the crook of Turkey. And so for some reason, Venice, I have not done research on this, but they have like an outpost here. And the Turks are attacking it. And you can see why that would happen because it's close. It's probably really advantageous for them to have things here. What I want to note about that in particular is that later on in this scene, as you've already read, they're going to send Othello and everyone to Cyprus to defend this place. And that's important because you'll know it's even further south, it's way further south than Venice. So, not only for an English audience have we already set this play in Italy, which is more dramatic than England, then put a character in there who is from North Africa or around this area somewhere. And now we are moving our cast of characters to this island. And it's kind of like how, everything goes down during the summer or everything goes down when you take a beach trip or you go south, or that metaphor of even going south has a lot to do with American things. But um, it is connected to this idea that crazier things are going to happen when we get to Cyprus, when we get to this climate. So that's going to be the case here as well, and in the minds of our audience as well. So Turks are attacking Cyprus, and Othello comes in. The whole group, Othello, Verbantio, everyone comes in, and they think that they're there to talk about this business, but really, obviously, Verbontio has other things on his mind. So Verbontio tells the Duke what's happened. His daughter has been stolen from him, and the Duke sets up this nice dramatic irony moment where after Brabantio says it, what has happened that his daughter has been stolen, he says, let's see, whoever it is that has done this, whoever he be, you shall yourself read in the bitter letter the bloody book of law. So basically, he's telling Brabantio, you can name the punishment. Whoever did this to you, you can name the punishment, even if it was my son, he says, even though a proper son stood in your action. Like, whoever this is, whoever has done this for you, I don't care who it is, you can um, you can do with it what you want. Basically, you can read the law and decide their penalty. So Rontio is pretty satisfied with that, and then he points at Othello the Moor. Well, Everyone is pretty upset about that. Everyone says that. And instead of saying to Brabantio, okay, tell me the punishment, he says, what do you have to say about this, Othello? So we're obviously kind of seeing that Othello does have some weight with these people because they're asking, okay, what's going on here? So here we start Othello talking about this. Othello is gets to tell his side of the story to the Duke to determine what's going to happen here. And I always like pointing out this because this is the first real long thing we hear from Othello. And just like I said about the monologue that Iago started with, this monologue from Othello, these couple of monologues from Othello, really function to show who he is as a person at the beginning of this play. So we'll take a deep dive. So he starts out talking to these senators, very respectful, like most potent, grave, reverend signors. But then what he says is, rude am I in my speech, and little blessed with the soft phrase of peace. So, what he's doing, and I took two notes here in another class, um, he's saying a couple of things because he's not blessed with the soft phrase of peace because he has used all of his action in the tented field in broil and battle, is what he says. Some more nice alliteration there. So in saying that he is not a good speaker, he's saying the reason he's not a good speaker is because he hasn't had a lot of time to practice speaking and things like that are like peacetime activities because he's been so busy in battle. And that battle is specifically battle that is based in like the Duke's army. Like he has been fighting for the Duke. So in saying this, he's kind of drawing attention to all the service he has provided the Duke in the past. Pretty clever. But what he's also saying is, I'm not a polished speaker, so I can't lie. I'm not a good liar. I'm not a polished speaker. I have, I haven't practiced speech making. And I think this is important. We can talk about this in a few ways. We could call this something like plain folk strategy, if you've ever heard of that, rhetorical device, trying to appeal and say, I'm just your average person, so you can trust me. He's kind of doing that. Um, but also, it makes me think of, and y'all are probably too young to remember this, but like back in 2008, the 2008 election, when Barack Obama was running for the first time, one of the criticisms laid against him was that he was too good of a speaker. That seems weird because you're like, well, don't you want the president to be a good speaker? But people said he was too good of a speaker, and that made him kind of untrustworthy because he could like, if you've ever heard the phrase "talk your way out of a paper bag," is that a phrase? I don't know, but he could talk his way out of things. Is their idea that they leveled against him? I'm not saying that's true. Just saying that that's what was said at the time, and so Othello is kind of like showing the opposite of this. He's trying to say that I'm not a polished speaker and therefore you can trust me. Which I think is a little ironic because in those few lines of saying that, he has reminded them of his service, and then tried to make himself seem more trustworthy, which I think makes you a pretty good speaker. And he gets a little sarcastic after that. Well, actually, let me emphasize, I like this line. He says he will a round, unvarnished tale deliver. So he can deliver this straightforward tale because he can't gussy it up any. So that's interesting. But he gets sarcastic, saying what drugs, what charms, what conjurations, and mighty magic I used, obviously implying that he totally did not. So then Verbontio comes back and repeats basically some of the thoughts he had before relating to how his daughter is so perfect and so she could never be with Othello, that she would never do this, so he must have used magic. He's saying that Desdemona was so still and quiet that if she moved, she blushed at herself. Like she was so perfect and obedient that she wouldn't even move. And if she did, she would be embarrassed. That's rough. Rough on y'all ladies to be perfect like that. And then like again refers to nature as like in her nature. she could not be attracted to this person who's her opposite. If she's this obedient, beautiful, well-bred white woman, Othello is the opposite, like this. He represents everything bad and whatever. Um, Besides that, he's saying years, their age discrepancy, their country, so their nationality is so different. How could she fall in love with what she feared to look on? So again, his appearance is what he's blaming. He's saying this has to be magic because of Othello's skin color. It's against all rules of nature. So the Duke, hearing all this, says, "Okay, well, you talk about it." And so Othello's gonna. He says, "Othello, tell me how you fell in love, and we'll also bring Desdemona in so she can speak for herself." So they go get Desdemona, and then Othello tells his story. So Othello tells this big story, and what's interesting about the story is he's saying that Verbantio and he were friends. Like Verbantio and Othello were friends. Verbantio would ask Othello to come over and to tell the story of his life because Othello has been through such interesting things. Which is interesting that Verbantio and Othello were friends up until this moment. And Verbontio apparently loved having Othello around to tell stories about how different his life was. But when it comes down to marrying his daughter, then he turns racist. I think that's an interesting thought because I think, in our society today, we still have that issue. You could have a black friend or you can enjoy black creators, black artists, black music, black stories, but then when it comes down to the heart of the matter, sometimes there's still racism or prejudice when it comes to taking something away. Um, like in this case, his property, his daughter. Now that Verbontio feels threatened, then he's reacting with all this racist language. So he would tell the story. And the story is really interesting. I highlighted in specific this word anthropophagi. Let me show you what an anthropophagi is. Let's Google it real quick here. So these are anthropophagi. They're these monsters that people used to talk about in literature. This was my favorite image. Like it's just looks like a regular dude, but his face is in his chest. There are much scarier versions. They're just so funny to me. This is so fun. This is so funny to me. Anyway, that's an anthropophagi. So going back to our notes. So back in this day, so like obviously that's a monster that's not real, but during this time they thought they were real. People would go and do anybody who traveled, which not a lot of people could travel. So anyone who traveled would write accounts of their time traveling, and people just believed whatever they wrote because they couldn't check on it. It to me, I think this is probably kind of like how the idea of mermaids got started, where people would see manatees and then they thought that manatees were mermaids. So I think they must have seen something. Maybe they saw gorillas. I don't know what they saw, but then they came up with this idea of anthropophagi, these kind of monsters and cannibals. And anthropophagi were um, cannibals as well. So he tells these stories about his life and the battles and everything he's been in. And apparently Desdemona would hear, like as Othello was telling this to Brabantio, Desdemona would hear and Othello could tell she really wanted to listen, but always had to do something else. And so eventually he found some time to like sit with Desdemona and tell all his stories. And Desdemona, I think this is funny. She told him that, like, basically, she goes to Othello and she's like, Othello, if you know anyone who loves me, then you should tell them to tell your story and how I totally fall in love with them. It's like middle school stuff. So instead of saying, like, oh my gosh, I'm in love with you now, she was like, does this roundabout way. But anyway, she hears these stories. She pities them. She thinks they're amazing. And she falls in love with them. And the Duke's like, that would win my daughter too. Like he's like, that makes total sense. Othello's an impressive dude. So then Desdemona comes in and gets to speak for herself. And what's interesting to me here, and I actually kind of really honed in on this for the first time this year. I've taught this play for like 8 years, but um, maybe longer, maybe 10 years. Wow. Anyway, so Brabantio, the first question he asks his daughter, who he is saying in just a few minutes ago, he thought that she's been drugged or thought that she's been like had a spell cast on her. But the first thing he asks is, do you perceive in all this company where most you owe obedience? Instead of asking, hey, are you okay? Like, he just asks, where do you most owe obedience? And I think that really shows Brabantio's attitude and also just the attitudes of the time that women are property and he is owed her obedience. And that's what he's upset about is not what's happened to her, but losing her like undying obedience. So, Desdemona talks about the duty she owes to her father, but then she says that she owes the most to her husband, Othello. And she talks about how that's the process women go through is that they have to leave their fathers and they have to prefer their husbands above their fathers. Um, so she says that. So Brabantio's like, all right. She says that this is true. There's nothing really Verbantio can do at this point. He cannot prove that it was drugs or magic or whatever. And he's really the most upset with Desdemona because he would love to believe that it had to be drugs or magic to have made her disobey him or to ever leave him. Like her loyalty is so important to him, and so the fact that she did it of her own free will, he's basically like, I'm done with you. Like you're nothing. Um, so um, he also does this thing that's kind of some stage directions show we don't have it in this version, but him like taking Othello when he says, "Come hither more," um, and let's see if I can get to there. Yeah, takes them together in kind of this like fake marriage ceremony. So if you've ever been to a wedding, or if you've ever been to like, well, especially like a heterosexual wedding, if you've ever been to that, often the tradition, not always, but often the tradition is that the bride will be given away, right? So you have the bride, she walks down the aisle, and her father is almost always, the one who gives her to the husband. This is recreating this idea of property exchange, that the father owns the daughter, and the marriage ceremony is him transferring his property from him to the next man that she's going to be passed to. Now, obviously, today, when we do that tradition, that's not what we mean most of the time. It's more of about, oh, I love my family, and this is how my family's involved, and the mom has a special place, and the dad has a special place, or whatever. So that's great. But the original intent of that part of the ceremony is to represent this transference of property. And so he does that. Come hither more. I heard you give thee that when he's giving Desdemona, even though he says, I wish with all my heart I could keep her away from you. So then we get some interesting stylistic moments here. In the next lines, right around here, the Duke and Verbantio start to have rhyming couplets. So we already know, as we talked about before, that the whole play is written in iambic pentameter, but now we are switching to some rhyme. So this rhyme, there are different reasons why Shakespeare rhymes. Sometimes it's to show higher class. So, like in the play A Midsummer Night's Dream, we have kings and queens, and they pretty much speak in sonnets, speak in rhyme all the time. And that's to show that they are so high class and so poetic. In this particular instance, the rhyme is used to kind of show wisdom, like little nuggets of wisdom being dropped, kind of like proverbs. Like if you think about the book of the Bible that's Proverbs, it's like little nuggets of wisdom. Same thing here. So the Duke is trying to give Brabantio some advice, and I think it kind of is summed up in these lines, talking about, he says, the robbed that smiles steals something from the thief. He robs himself that spends a bootless grief. Basically, the idea is that if you are robbed of a physical possession, don't also be robbed of your happiness. Because if the thief was trying to steal both your physical possession and your happiness, If you are still happy after, then you have stolen it back. And that if you are upset over something you already lost, then you're just losing twice because you've lost the thing and now you've lost your happiness. So he's basically telling Verbantio to like, all right, this happened, it's sad, but like let's just make the best of it. So Verbantio responds, oh, okay, well, if I'm supposed to just smile if we lost something, then why don't you do that too? Let the Turk of Cyprus us beguile. Like let the Turks take Cyprus. We don't really lose it as long as we're happy still. So that's a response that basically shows Verbantio's like, no, I'm not having this. Like, no thanks. I'm not going to be happy about what just happened. So they move on, and we learn that Othello needs to leave tonight to go to Cyprus. And Desdemona wants to go with him because I mean, they just got married, so that's allowed to happen. One important part about that is what Othello says about it. Again, Othello is defying stereotypes. So this is a little awkward, but it's important to the story. Othello says, I don't want her to come with me to please the palate of my appetite, nor to comply with the heat, the young effects in me defunct, and proper satisfaction. Basically, that's saying the palate of his appetite is sexual appetite. He's saying, I don't want her there for that reason. The young effects in me defunct. That's kind of saying like, young men are super interested in sex, but I'm kind of past that age. It's not like that's not a thing for me anymore. Um, so again, when Othello is supposed to be based on where he lives, the hot region he's supposed to be this super sexual being. He's like, no, I don't really have that kind of drive or those kind of lusts anymore. Um, which that reminds me, Desdemona at this time is probably late teens. I mean, to be a young unmarried woman, she'd probably have to be late teens, maybe early 20s, but that's getting kind of old for an unmarried woman at this time. So she's probably late teens. And Othello, I mean, based on this, I don't know how old he is, but he is referred to as older. So I would say he's got to be in his 40s. He could be older than that. Now, your 40s, you don't necessarily lose your sex drive, but so he's in his 40s, possibly 50s, but I'd say probably his 40s. Um, yeah, so there's another kind of distinction opposing things between them. But anyway, he says that that's not it. That's not what I want. I just want her to feel good about this. So um, all that is that. One other important note about the fact that Othello has to leave. So this Othello and Desdemona just got married. This is their wedding night. And what's important about that is on your wedding night, you're supposed to consummate your marriage. And yes, that means have sex. And the important part about that is consummating your marriage is what solidifies, kind of seals the deal, makes your marriage official. And if you don't do that, I don't know about modern times, but back then, if you don't do that, you can get your marriage annulled, which is like it never happened. It's not even like a divorce. So that was really important. And I'll tell you more about that later in the play, but it's important to know that since Othello has to leave tonight, that means that Othello and Desdemona do not get to consummate their marriage. One important part about this that we'll get into later is that um, consummating your marriage at this time, your wedding night, was also supposed to prove the virginity of the bride. We'll get into that later. Um, Let me be clear. There is actually no way to prove virginity. That is like a totally, first of all, made up concept, but also there's no medical way to check for virginity or prove virginity that is false. But at this time, they thought you could, and we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, so they she does not get the opportunity to do that tonight because he has to go away, and that becomes important. But beyond that, as we're wrapping this up, Verbontio has and the Duke have a conversation with some important lines. The Duke tells Othello, I guess I didn't mark this correctly. Oh no. Let me pause for a second. Okay. The Duke tells Othello in another rhyming couplet, so another like proverb he's trying to share. If virtue no delighted beauty lack, your son in law is far more fair than black. This is an important line to kind of show what Othello is facing. So, this is supposed to be a compliment. The literal meaning is if virtue, if like your inner goodness, if your morality, always showed in your outer appearance, no delighted beauty lack, like your outer beauty basically matched your inner beauty, then your son-in-law is far more fair than black. So basically, he's saying your son-in-law is such a good person that he's basically white. What? So he's complimenting Othello. He's like, Othello is so great. Um, but in complimenting Othello, he's still at the same time disparaging Othello's race and like a whole group of people. And this reminds me a lot of things I still hear today. Um, so I often hear, particularly in my honors classes, honestly, when I have Black students, I hear them tell me that they've heard this, and I hear other people tell them that, well, you're basically white or you act white. There's a problem with that. And if you've ever said that, I'm not like picking on you. Like, I just want you to understand why it's problematic. Um, the problem with that is, first of all, it's saying that there is a way to act white, which is not a thing, and also that there's a way to act black. And there's judgment being placed in both of those things, a value judgment being placed. And the fact that you call someone who's in an honors class not that they're acting white kind of is implying that to act black is to not act smart. That's obviously racist. Even if you're trying to compliment that one person, just like the Duke is here. The Duke loves Othello. The Duke has been on Othello's side for this whole thing. Like, I'd say Othello is kind of the Duke's black friend. And he loves Othello, thinks he's a great person, but he's disparaging his whole race by saying that. So you can see what Othello's up against. Othello has achieved so much. He's this great position, a way higher position than Iago. He has money. He has a beautiful, wonderful, perfect wife. He has all of this. And yet, and he's so well respected, even by the person in charge. But with all of this, someone is still commenting and trying to compliment him, um, but that he's all these things, but he has despite his race. Like, and that there's this one thing kind of hanging over him that is imperfect about him. It's a shame. Anyway, Verbontio responds, and then he talks to Othello, and he drops a nugget of wisdom on Othello. Look to her more, if thou hast eyes to see. She has deceived her father and made thee. So basically, Verbantio is warning Othello, she cheated on me. So what makes you think she won't cheat on you? And he kind of has a point. I mean, think about it. Like, I always, when I hear high school drama, and this is not just high school drama, adults do this too, and I still don't understand it. But like, if you've ever dated someone who like just cheated on someone else, what makes you think that person's not going to cheat on you? Have you ever had a friend do this? Have you ever done this? Why would you date someone who cheated on someone else? I don't get it. And that's kind of Brabantio's thing here. He's saying, look, she like didn't tell me. This came out of left field. She just went off and did this. Won't she do the same thing to you? And Othello says, my life upon her faith. So basically, he's saying he trusts her, that she is uh, that she's trustworthy, that I believe she's faithful. I will stake my life on the fact that she is faithful. And then but the opposite is also true, right? So he stakes his life on the fact that she is faithful. But if she's not faithful, that means he forfeits his life. And hint, that's some foreshadowing that his life depends upon her faithfulness. We also get some more irony here. We see honest Iago. We will see Iago referred to as honest Iago a lot, which is ironic, verbal irony, because he is not honest. Like, obviously, he's just lied to everyone. So now we get to the end of scene 3 and therefore the end of Act 1. And I want you to notice that we end with this conversation between Rodrigo and Iago. And what's interesting about that is we started this act with the conversation between Rodrigo and Iago. And with that, we are going to see oftentimes we're going to end with those two characters. And the reason for that is they're kind of, especially Iago, but they're kind of the ones who are, well, Iago's pulling the strings, Rodrigo's being used by Iago. And so we get their setup and then we get them kind of reflecting on the events of what's happening. So Rodrigo here says he's going to drown himself. He is so upset that Desdemona is now officially with Othello that he's going to drown himself. Like he can't live with this. And so we see Rodrigo kind of exemplifying what we learned about with the emotion and jealousy section. That emotion is frowned upon. It's seen as like the opposite of rationality. It's seen as especially bad for men, and that like emotion can make you make really bad decisions. If you're overly passionate, it means you don't have reason and it's bad. Rodrigo exemplifies this. He's like the living embodiment of it. I realized in one class today, if you know the term simp, he's basically a simp. Like he's a simp for Desdemona. Even though it's no simp September, apparently, is what I learned. Sorry, guys, I'm lame. Anyway, so Rodrigo and Iago have this conversation. Rodrigo says that he wants to kill himself, and Iago's like, no, don't do that. And Iago basically, in this section right here, I'll do a box highlighter. He basically outlines the beliefs of this time period about emotion and how bad it is. And he uses this metaphor about gardens. He says your body's a garden and you can control basically your emotions, your will, your reason can control it. Whether you want to plant this or that or harvest this or that, like your reason can control it. Um, and he uses some terms that we talked about with the four humors. So he says that your blood and baseness of your natures. So like the passionate parts of you are based in the blood, this like hot fiery part. But we have reason to cool our raging motions, our lusts. So again, that image of coolness, the cool climate, um, the the different cold, um, the cold humors, so black bile and phlegm. Those can calm the other parts. They can control the other parts when you have them in balance. So he says that. So basically, he ends up convincing Rodrigo to do a few things. So in this big speech that you probably heard, where he says a lot, put money in thy purse, he convinces Rodrigo to follow the wars and defeat thy favor with the usurped beard. So it basically says, follow everyone to Cyprus, put on a fake beard, a taken beard, disguised beard, and defeat thy favor. So defeating thy favor, like thy favor is the person that you want. Like, so he's saying, um, you're basically he's saying, put on fake beard, go to the war, get all your money together, start giving Desdemona jewels so that she will be with you. Um, and he gives some reasons why he thinks this will work. He says it was a violent commencement and we'll see an answerable sequestration. This reminds me of a line from Romeo and Juliet where it says these violent delights will have violent ends. And basically, it starts quickly, it's going to end quickly. And that's what he's saying here. This relationship started quickly, it's going to end quickly. And then he talks about um, the um, the natures of both Othello and Desdemona and why that will lead them to end this quickly. He says, these Moors are changeable in their wills. Again, referring to that climate theory that where they're from, they're just, they don't have this reason, they have more passion. They flit from thing to thing. And that then he calls him an erring barbarian. Again, like this outsider, barbarian being an outsider. And then he calls her a super subtle Venetian. So this is a reference that I can't remember if I've said it with you guys or with another class, but Again, we are super obsessed with women's chastity at this time, and and in particular, Venetian women had a reputation because Venice is home to or was home to a famous brothel with prostitutes. So he's kind of hinting at that like Desdemona's a Venetian woman, you can't trust her, kind of thing, even though she has this good reputation. And so he's saying, you can definitely do this. And I really like this last line of trying to convince him. He says, seek thou rather to be hanged encompassing thy joy than to be drowned and go without her. So, where Rodrigo is talking about committing suicide, there's a couple of things he could mean here. He's like, look, if you're going to die anyway by suicide, then you rather die, might as well die like having been with Desdemona and then being killed for that crime, rather than just dying without her. And then he could be talking about this religiously, like at this time in especially in Catholic Italy, um, the idea was that if you committed suicide, you would go to hell, and of course, commit the sin of adultery, then that could send you to hell. So if he says, like, if you're going to go to hell anyway, you might as well sleep with her as the reason you're going to hell, rather than suicide. So you know, some kind of argument. So Rodrigo agrees. And then let's get to this very last part. So, this very last part of this act, Iago does a final soliloquy. So, this soliloquy, um, an important thing to note about a soliloquy, you do want to take this note. Soliloquies are when a character speaks their thoughts out loud. So, like, if you're reading a book, you can just read a character's thoughts, but if you're watching a play or reading a play, um, it's all dialogue. So, to get a character's thoughts, you really have to put it out there out loud. So, a soliloquy is like that. Famous soliloquies include like the to be or not to be speech, where Hamlet's contemplating life. When Juliet is on the balcony and saying, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? She's thinking out loud. So Iago has a bunch of soliloquies, and they definitely function to show his character, but also to show kind of his plan. But what's interesting to me about Iago's soliloquies is and I probably should do some more research into this, but I kind of feel like they're writing a line between a true soliloquy and then breaking the fourth wall. So, breaking the fourth wall is another term you need to know. And it's this idea of when a character speaks directly to the audience, kind of acknowledging the fact that there is an audience. So, a good example of this is Deadpool. So, if you've ever played a Deadpool video game or seen a comic or a movie, um, he will stop and talk to the audience directly. So that's kind of what could be happening here. That term fourth wall is referring to the wall between the audience and the actors. So if you think about if you're watching a play, there's like the wall behind the actors, there's the two sides, and then that fourth wall is the wall between the audience and the actors. So um, Iago might be doing that here with his first line where he says, thus do I ever make my fool my purse. He's talking about how he just convinced Rodrigo to do this thing. And he's saying, see, that's how I do it. That's how I get money, making him my purse. That's how I get money from dumb people. So I think in here, Iago might be breaking the fourth wall and like kind of showing that he's this puppet master behind everything. If you've ever seen House of Cards, I'm pretty sure that House of Cards is heavily based on Othello, with Frank Underwood being Iago. Um, just he gives me that Iago vibe. But anyway, so I'm going to read the soliloquy actually, because this ending soliloquy talks about the plan for the rest of the play. So first he's talking about Iago. Thus do I ever make my fool my purse. For I my own gain knowledge should profane if I would time expend with such a snipe, but for my sport and profit. I hate the Moor, and it is thought abroad that twixt my sheets he's done my office. I know not if it be true, but I for mere suspicion in that kind will do as if for surety. He holds me well. The better shall my purpose work on him. Cassio's a proper man, let me see now. to get his place and to plume up my will in double knavery. How? How? Let's see. After some time to abuse Othello's ear that he is too familiar with his wife. He hath a person and a smooth disposed to be suspected, framed to make women false. The more is of a free and open nature that thinks men honest that but seem to be so, and will as tenderly be led by the nose as asses are. I have it. It is engendered. Hell and night must bring this monstrous birth to the world's light. So, some important things to pick out here is he gives another reason why he hates Othello. He says that it's thought abroad that twixt my sheets he's done my office. So, what that means is it's thought abroad, it's a rumor that he's done my office, done my job twixt my sheets in my bed, basically. And what's Iago's job in his bed? Well, to be with his wife. So, there's a rumor that Othello has slept with Iago's wife. And so he says, I don't know if it's true, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to act as if it is just because of the suspicion. So I don't know how true this is. Neither does Iago. But right now he's kind of piling on reasons to be upset at Othello. I think there might be something more going on here as far as Iago's mentality around this. But he's going to exact his revenge, even more of revenge than originally intended because of this rumor, apparently. So he comes up with a plan. And basically, his plan is he talks about Cassio. Cassio's a proper man. How can I get Cassio's job and also get revenge at the same time? So he says, I'm going to abuse Othello's ear. Um, There we go. Abuse Othello's ear that he, Cassio, is too familiar with Othello's wife. So he's going to tell Othello that Cassio and Desdemona, watch out. I think they're getting a little close. They might be too close together. And he says this will work because Cassio hath a person and a smooth disposed to be suspected, framed to make women false. So, like, Cassio's this ladies' man. He's charming. He's educated. He's good looking. So it's going to be easy to suspect that he is with Desdemona, and that the more Othello is trusting. So it'll be easy to make him trust this. So that is the plan at the end of Act 1, and Act 2, we'll see how that plan goes.